A father built wings out of feathers and wax so he and his son could escape from an island prison. He told the boy, "Fly the middle course. Not too low, or the sea spray will soak the feathers. Not too high, or the sun will melt the wax." The boy nodded. They took off. The father flew carefully, checking behind him. The boy flew higher and higher. The father called out warnings. The boy did not listen. He flew toward the sun. The wax melted. The feathers came apart. He fell into the sea and drowned. This is the story of Icarus and Daedalus, and it is about the cost of not listening when someone who knows better tells you the limits. The myth is preserved in Ovid's Metamorphoses and references throughout Greek and Roman literature. It is one of the most famous cautionary tales in Western culture. The image of Icarus falling from the sky has been painted, sculpted, and referenced for 2,000 years. The story is simple. The lesson is clear, and people still do not listen. What makes the myth powerful is how preventable the tragedy is. Daedalus tells Icarus exactly what will happen if he flies too high. Icarus has every piece of information he needs. He ignores it. That is not a flaw in the warning. That is a flaw in human nature. We know the limits. We test them anyway. If you're following the complete Greek mythology series, subscribe to Snop Old Myths and hit the bell. Like this video if you want more, and let's get into the flight that should never have gone that high. Daedalus was the greatest craftsman and inventor in Greece. He built the Labyrinth for King Minos of Crete, the maze so complex that nothing could escape. He designed mechanical statues that moved on their own. He invented carpentry tools, the saw, the axe, the level. He was brilliant. He was also arrogant, and that arrogance led to murder. Daedalus had a nephew named Talos, or Perdix, depending on the source, who was also a skilled craftsman. The boy invented the saw by studying the spine of a fish. He invented the compass. He was 12 years old and already threatening to surpass his uncle. Daedalus could not tolerate it. He pushed the boy off a cliff. Athena, who valued cleverness, caught the boy mid-fall and transformed him into a partridge. Daedalus was exiled from Athens for the murder. He fled to Crete, where King Minos hired him. Daedalus built the Labyrinth to imprison the Minotaur. It was his masterpiece, a maze with walls that shifted, corridors that looped back on themselves, a prison from which nothing could escape. When Theseus came to kill the Minotaur, Daedalus helped him. He told Ariadne to give Theseus the thread that would let him navigate the maze and return. Minos discovered the betrayal. He was furious. Daedalus had helped the man who killed the Minotaur and humiliated Crete. Minos could not execute Daedalus because he was too valuable, but he could not let him leave. So Minos imprisoned Daedalus and his son Icarus in a tower on Crete. Daedalus, who had built the inescapable Labyrinth, was now trapped himself. But Daedalus was still the greatest inventor in Greece. He studied the problem. Minos controlled the land and the sea. Every ship was watched. Every road was guarded. But Minos did not control the sky. No one did. Birds flew freely. If Daedalus could build wings, he could fly away. So he began gathering feathers. Daedalus collected feathers from the birds that landed near the tower. He arranged them by size, small to large, to mimic the shape of a bird's wing. He bound them together with thread and wax. The wax heated just enough to hold, but not so much that it would remain soft. He built 2 sets of wings, one for himself and one for Icarus. The design was brilliant. It would work. But it had a fatal weakness: the wax. Before they flew, Daedalus gave Icarus instructions. Fly the middle course. Not too low, or the sea spray will weigh down the feathers and you will fall. Not too high, or the sun will melt the wax and the wings will come apart. Stay close to me. Follow my path. This is important. Daedalus knew the limits of what he had built. He told Icarus exactly where those limits were. Icarus understood. They took off. At first, Icarus followed his father's instructions. He flew at the right height, following the path Daedalus chose. But the sensation of flight was overwhelming. He was doing something no human had ever done. He was flying. The wind was in his face. The world was below him. The sky was open. He wanted more. Icarus began to climb. Not dramatically at first, just a little higher, then higher still. Daedalus called out to him. Icarus either did not hear or did not care. He kept climbing. He was heading toward the sun. The heat increased. The wax began to soften. Daedalus shouted warnings. Icarus did not turn back. The wax melted. The feathers began to separate. Icarus felt the wings losing their structure. He tried to flap harder, but there was nothing left to flap. The wings came apart completely. He was no longer flying. He was falling. He hit the water and drowned. Daedalus circled back, searching, calling his son's name. He found only feathers floating on the sea. Daedalus retrieved the body and buried it on a nearby island. The island is still called Icaria. The sea where Icarus fell is still called the Icarian Sea. Daedalus continued to Sicily, where he lived out the rest of his life building temples and devices. He never built wings again. The cost was too high. The myth is almost always interpreted as a warning against hubris, against overreaching, against ignoring the advice of those who know better. Icarus had the information. His father told him the limits. He chose to ignore them. That is the traditional reading, and it is not wrong. But there is another way to look at it. Some modern interpretations frame Icarus as a hero. He flew toward the sun. He pushed past the limits his father set. He wanted more than the middle course. Yes, he died, but he experienced something his father never did. He flew as high as a human could fly. For a moment, before the wax melted, he touched the sun. That moment was worth the cost. That reading is romantic and appealing. It makes Icarus a symbol of ambition, of refusing to accept limits, of reaching for something greater even if it destroys you. But it requires ignoring what actually happens in the story. Icarus does not die doing something impossible. He dies doing something possible in a reckless way. Daedalus's wings worked. The middle course was safe. Icarus did not push past human limits. He ignored the limits of wax. The other detail often overlooked is Daedalus's grief. He is the one who has to continue. He is the one who built the wings. He is the one who gave the instructions. He is the one who watched his son fall. Daedalus loses his nephew to his own arrogance and jealousy. Then he loses his son to his son's arrogance and recklessness. The myth is as much about Daedalus as it is about Icarus. The painter Peter Bruegel captured this in landscape with The Fall of Icarus, a painting where Icarus is barely visible, just legs disappearing into the water in the corner of the canvas. The rest of the painting shows normal life continuing. A farmer plows. A shepherd tends sheep. A ship sails past. No one notices the boy falling from the sky. The world does not stop for individual tragedy. W.H. Auden wrote a poem about the painting called Musée des Beaux-Arts. He notes how the old masters understood suffering, how it happens while someone else is eating or opening a window, how disaster occurs, and life simply continues around it. Icarus falls. The plowman hears the splash maybe and continues plowing. That is the other lesson of the myth. Your catastrophe is not the world's catastrophe. The story also raises the question of whether Daedalus should have built the wings at all. He knew they were dangerous. He knew his son was young and impulsive. He built them anyway because escape required it. Once he decided to fly, the risk was inherent. You cannot build wings out of wax and feathers and expect perfection. The design has a flaw. The question is whether the escape was worth the flaw. Modern retellings often focus on Icarus and ignore Daedalus. But Daedalus is the more interesting character. He is brilliant and he is cursed by his brilliance. He builds the labyrinth and it traps him. He builds the wings and they kill his son. Everything he creates has unintended consequences. He cannot stop creating, but everything he creates destroys something. The myth teaches several things. First, that limits exist for a reason. Daedalus did not set the middle course arbitrarily. He understood the materials. He understood the heat of the sun and the weight of the sea spray. The limits were real. Icarus treated them as suggestions. He paid the price. Second, it teaches that knowing the limits is not the same as respecting them. Icarus knew. His father told him. He understood intellectually. But understanding and respecting are different things. Icarus understood the danger and flew toward it anyway. That is not ignorance. That is choice. Third, it teaches that genius does not prevent tragedy. Daedalus was the smartest man in Greece. He built wings that actually worked. But intelligence does not control human nature. He could not engineer his son into obedience. He could not design around recklessness. The wings were brilliant. The boy was human. That was enough. Fourth, it teaches that warnings do not prevent catastrophe. Daedalus warned Icarus, clearly, explicitly. It did not matter. Some people will ignore warnings no matter how clear they are. Some people need to test the limits themselves. Some people will fly toward the sun because you told them not to. The myth is often used to criticize ambition. Do not fly too high. Do not reach for more than you can handle. Stay in your lane. That interpretation makes Icarus a cautionary tale against aspiration. But that misses the point. Daedalus was not telling Icarus to avoid ambition. He was telling him to respect the materials. The wings could fly. They could not fly into the sun. That is not a moral limit. That is physics. Some versions of the myth include a detail about what Icarus was thinking as he climbed. He was so overwhelmed by the joy of flight that he forgot the danger. He was not being defiant. He was being intoxicated. The experience was so extraordinary that it overrode his judgment. That makes the tragedy more understandable, but not less final. Joy does not prevent wax from melting. Daedalus continued inventing after Icarus died. He built a temple to Apollo in Sicily. He created mechanical bees that pollinated flowers. He designed defensive fortifications. He never stopped building. But he also never forgot what his creations cost. The labyrinth cost him his freedom. The wings cost him his son. Every invention carries a price. The fall of Icarus has become shorthand for any ambitious project that fails because someone ignored warnings. Dot-com bubbles, housing crises, financial collapses. Every time someone builds something that seems to defy gravity and then crashes, someone calls it an Icarus moment. The metaphor works because the structure is always the same. Build something fragile. Ignore the warnings. Fly too high. Fall. But the metaphor also gets misused. Icarus did not fail because he tried to fly. He failed because he flew badly. The middle course worked. Daedalus made it to Sicily. The wings were functional. The design was sound. Icarus failed because he ignored the operating parameters. That is not a failure of ambition. That is a failure of discipline. The myth is also a story about fathers and sons. Daedalus tries to save his son by building wings. He gives him clear instructions. He watches him ignore those instructions. He cannot force Icarus to listen. He can only watch him fall. Every parent who has watched a child ignore good advice and suffer the consequences understands Daedalus. Icarus is often depicted as young, a teenager or early 20s, old enough to understand warnings, young enough to ignore them. That age where you think you know better, where you think the rules do not apply to you, where you test limits because you do not yet believe they are real. Icarus did not think the wax would melt, or he thought he could handle it, or he thought the joy was worth the risk. He was wrong. The story of Icarus and Daedalus is not about whether you should try to fly. It is about whether you should listen when someone who built the wings tells you how high you can go. Icarus flew. That was not the mistake. He flew higher than the design allowed. That was the mistake. The wax melted. The wings came apart. He fell. That is what happens when you ignore the limits of the materials. Daedalus told him, not too high, not too low. The middle course. Icarus had every piece of information he needed to survive. He chose not to use it. That is the tragedy. Not that he tried, not that he failed. That he failed because he ignored the one person who could have saved him. His father built the wings. His father knew the limits. His father told him. He did not listen. 2,000 years later, we still tell this story. We still use Icarus as a warning. Fly too high and you will fall. But we also still ignore the warning. We build things out of wax and feathers. We fly toward the sun. We think we are different. We think the rules do not apply. The wax melts. We fall. The sea is still called Icarian. This video was created by combining human research and script writing with our AI-assisted visual production, bringing these ancient stories to life for modern audiences. For more Greek mythology, related books, and the AI tools we use to make this content, check the links in the description below.